Hello, everybody, and welcome to Shannon Q. I am Shannon Q, and I am super, super, super excited that you are here today. We are going to be talking about something that is exceptionally important that I think everybody should listen to, and we are going to be talking with somebody who I think everybody should hear and read his book. All of his links are in the description, but we'll get to that later. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to my guest today. TikTok ingenue, Andrew Seidel.
Hello, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
I'm super excited that you're here. So, you wrote a book, and I am
I
currently
did.
reading your book. Unfortunately, I'm not all the way done, but that doesn't mean that there's not already just more to talk about than we can fit in the time that we have today. So, you wrote a book called American Crusade. So, why don't you give anybody who's not familiar with the fact that you wrote the book or what the book's concept and general thesis is, a little bit of an idea of what the book's about and what motivated you to write it?
Sure. So basically, religious freedom has long been this shield in the United States. It is a defense, it's defended the minority against the tyranny of the majority. Never in our history has it been a license to violate the rights of others or to harm others. But that's what this Supreme Court that we have here in the United States is doing right now. It is weaponizing religious freedom in case after case. It's letting Christians injure other people, violate their rights, and then claim religious freedom as the justification for that harm. That is where we are right now. And that is what American Crusade, how the Supreme Court is weaponizing religious freedom, seeks to educate people on. I'll put it mildly right that. I genuinely don't think you can understand what is happening in this country, in the United States right now, with religion and the law and politics, with our Supreme Court, without understanding this crusade.
Yeah, it's a book that we had a chat about it before. Sometimes it can be hard to read because it very
Mm-hmm.
much puts in your face exactly what's going on. It lays it out very, very systematically. And what I see is kind of the overriding theme throughout the book, or I guess it would be like maybe an underlying thesis of the book, is it seems that Christian nationalists seem to either want to be entirely exempt from the law or they want to have special privileges under the law. And they're kind of doing everything they can to put all of the pieces in place in the judicial system, and through public propaganda to get support for things like elections to ensure that that happens. And I've heard you say before that that is kind of them potentially riling against the loss of privilege. And you've talked some about the psychology of that, which I always find interesting. Do you feel as though that's kind of like a fair synopsis of the overarching like thesis of the book?
I do. So, I mean, there's this network of well-funded and faithful activist groups,
Mm-hmm.
who I call the Crusaders, together with justices on our Supreme Court, have been waging this crusade. And it really is a war of conquest. And now they're not seeking to conquer land, but they are seeking to conquer our Constitution and remake it in their image. They're setting out to make America a Christian nation and warping religious freedom to do that. And really they truly are weaponizing religious freedom. I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, I put it in the subtitle of the book, but like they are litigating the legal meaning of religious freedom as a constitutional right in case after case and redefining it. And your point about raging against the dying of their privilege is, I mean, to me, that is actually, when I was researching the book, that was one of the most interesting questions that I kept coming back to. I was like, why? Like, why this crusade? Why are Christian nationalists seeking this weapon? And what I figured out was that this crusade is largely a backlash against equality realized, right? So conservative white Christian Americans' status as the dominant group in this country is threatened. And it has been for some time. They're losing the quote, culture wars, which is, I think, a little bit of a silly phrase that's meant to mask attacks on human rights.
Yeah.
But really, they're losing their privilege and the deference which they believe they are due. And if you want a really great example of of this, go listen to Justice Sam Alito's gloating speech that he gave in Rome at a religious freedom conference. It was in July, and it's a glaring example of somebody who is losing in his mind the deference to which he believes his religion is due. And we know that when a dominant group or caste in a society feels threatened or left behind by circumstances, that it reacts. And in this case, it overreacts by seeking a way to retain that status. And that is why we are seeing here in the United States this turn to Christian nationalism from conservative white Christian America, this turn to violent insurrection, to these so-called strong men like Donald Trump. But it is also why we are seeing them seek to weaponize religious freedom. And there are data and studies that actually back this up. So really, I mean, you're right. Really, this crusade is a quest to remake a protection into a weapon for maintaining a dominant group's status.
Yeah.
And the expansion of equality and like this withering racial and religious hegemony is often, it's the contested territory in many of these cases. I mean, the short version is, I think, you said it well, conservative white Christian America is dying this slow demographic death, and they are rebelling. They are raging against the dying of their privilege. And so they declared war.
Yeah. And what struck me in the book is that how blatant the uneven application of their interpretations are, because you do a really, really good job. Again, we talked about this before of creating case precedent juxtaposition. So I don't want to give away everything, but there's way too much to give away. But this is very early on in the book, and the first thing that really struck me hard was the case of the Muslim who was on death row, who wanted to have not just wanted to have his pastor, wanted to not have to have a Christian pastor in the room with him, because the default is Christianity in a lot of these case laws. And then when a Christian had a similar request in a similar circumstance, they were treated entirely differently. So the application wasn't the same. Would you like to talk a little bit more about how you saw that as a theme?
Yeah, I mean, it really is a theme throughout the book, and it's, one of the things that I wrote early on is that the new guiding principle for this Supreme Court is not our Constitution. It's not the law. It's not the cases that have been decided over the past few decades or centuries even. It is simply this: Christianity wins. And sure, that means that other religions are going to win sometimes, but if you are like betting on the outcome of a case, ignore the law, ignore the Constitution, and bet on conservative Christianity. And we see this time and time again. It is a theme in the book. There's another really glaring and frustratingly obvious example, which was in 2018 when the Supreme Court decided this sort of infamous gay wedding cake case out of Colorado. And right there,
you found a case that like so related to that I had never even heard of. Like the Dirty Pig or whatever that it was called? This
barbecue place, Piggy Park Barbecue.
Yes,
but so in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, this bakery discriminates against a gay couple, Charlie Craig and Dave Mullins. I'm not going to serve you a cake for your wedding because you're gay. We know he did it because they were gay. There's no doubt about this. It wasn't because of the message they wanted on their cake. If you are arguing that, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not the facts of the case. The parties agreed upon the facts. And in it, he says the bakery, which is a limited liability corporation organized under the laws of the state of Colorado, says, we can't do this. We have a religious freedom right to discriminate against this couple despite a civil rights law, and a free speech right to discriminate against this couple despite a civil rights law. And the court doesn't answer those questions. Instead, what the court says is that the Civil Rights Commission in Colorado was hostile to the baker's religion. Basically, really, this is what it boils down to. They said some mean things about his religion, which is actually first of all, not factually accurate. Like one of the supposed mean things was quoting a New Mexico Supreme Court opinion that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, also a justice on the Supreme Court, quoted in one of her opinions. So, like, not something that's hostile toward religion. But they said you're being hostile towards Christianity, and because you're being hostile towards this Christian baker, we have to overturn the entire process that he went through. He didn't get a fair shake. Therefore, we're giving him a get out of jail free card. The discrimination against the gay couple is going to have to stand. Oh, well, nothing we can do. And then a couple weeks later, this same court turns around and upholds Donald Trump's Muslim ban, right? Which is like bigotry that was tweeted and stated and restated and written into an executive order. Like, you could not be more clear about the bigotry underlying this order. And the Supreme Court said, oh, hey, we can't be sure that this was hostile towards religion. And anyway, there's other issues because it's an executive order. So yeah, this is good. We're fine with this. So Muslims, any hostility towards them, that can stand. Christians, they manufactured hostility. The court made up hostility to allow a Christian to discriminate against an LGBTQ couple. I mean, you could not get a more stark example, except that there are many, many other examples, including, as you mentioned, one that I opened the book with, which is like on death row, where the court does not even deign to mention religious freedom. You get 2 paragraphs where the court kills this person and doesn't even mention religious freedom because he's a Muslim.
Yeah.
Black Muslim at that.
Yeah, it's appalling to me. And it also struck me how they were treating a business like a business was a person, and as though a business like has the same sets of rights that a person does.
Yeah.
And
it's crazy.
That seems bananas. Like in the book, you're like if you knocked on someone's door and said, bake me a cake, of course you can say no. But if you're walking into a business, you haven't even discussed what's going to be on the cake. The only thing you know about this couple is that they are gay and you refuse them service. That is the definition of discrimination. Mm-hmm. And you're upholding and allowing that to take place where in any other instance you wouldn't, and pointing to religious freedom as the reason. But a business has no religion. And how far does that go? Like, if you have one person who's one religion that's serving at a counter, does that mean the entire business can discriminate based on their individual beliefs? Like, what's the terminus of that? That seems like a ridiculous door to open and a dangerous one.
It's an absurd door to open, and the court not only opened it, but it ran through it without thinking.
Yeah, head first.
I mean, and this is one of the things that just has not been talked about enough that I really do try to dive into in a couple of chapters in the book. In the Hobby Lobby case, which people may remember, and in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, the gay wedding cake case, because the entire purpose of corporate law, and by that I mean when you go out and you form a business, you form a corporation, the entire purpose of that is to divorce you as the owner from the business entity you have created, right? Because it protects you. Because if you have a bakery and you bake a cake that is poisonous and gives people food poisoning and they're throwing up everywhere, those people can turn around and sue the bakery, the liability corporation entity, the business entity that you have set up, but they can't sue you personally. So your house, your kid's college fund, your car, all that, your savings, all of that stuff is safe, right? Now, your business might go bankrupt, but that's the whole point, right? You are personally divorced and separate. And we call it corporate separateness, right? These are 2 entities and there's a wall between them. A veil is what the legal term. And that's the whole reason we've invented this legal fiction behind it. And in this instance, the Supreme Court said, oh, no. People can shove their religion through if it means taking away other people's rights, if it means imposing conservative Christianity on them. And it is absolutely just, I mean, it is truly nuts that they've gone down this road. In the Hobby Lobby case, it's even more stark because the Hobby Lobby, the family behind Hobby Lobby is the Greens. this Christian nationalist family, the zealots, they're really out. They use a lot of their money to try to convert people to Christianity. They're behind the Museum of the Bible in DC. They tried to start a Bible class in Mustang, Oklahoma that I got shut down, which was like one of the most
Go,
absurd
Andrew.
classes that you've ever seen. And they are the beneficiaries of legal trusts, which is a very nebulous thing. Those trusts own all of the stock in the various Hobby Lobby corporations, and there are a few. So you have the people, then you have trusts, which is one layer of protection for income purposes. Then you have the corporations, which is another layer of protections. And then over here, you have the people who are employed. And the Supreme Court is letting the Greens' religion flow through all those layers of protection to be imposed on these folks way over here, when the entire purpose of these layers of protection is to divorce that as much as possible. And that is historically where we have done corporate separateness and the corporate veil and all of this. But all of a sudden with this Supreme Court, when it comes to religion, things are different. And that is one of the true messages of American Crusade, how the Supreme Court's weaponizing religious freedom. It's upside down. I mean, it is, with this court, everything is on the table. This court wants to decide these cases, but because it is part of this crusade to weaponize religious freedom.
Yeah, and giving businesses the same religious freedoms that people are entitled to seems an overreach to me.
Yeah.
And a bit bonkers, because they're conflating the two. They're conflating the people who either run the business or are a part of the business with the business itself, and then giving the business the same rights that those people would have individually, which is like the precedence of that seem bonkers. Because if they did an outsider test of faith, and it was a religion that they didn't like if, for example, it was a Muslim-run business that said everybody needs to wear a hijab if they work here, they wouldn't stand for that. But the principle's the same, or at least in my mind, it is.
No, I mean, I think it's hard to put into words how crazy this all was, especially because the court just kind of ignored it. They didn't really touch on this issue at all in their opinions. They basically sort of kind of hidden, for Hobby Lobby, they hit, it's a closely held corporation, as if that's a distinct thing. Or, like a family-owned corporation was another popular thing that you heard them. But like something like 90% of corporations in the country are that. It's a meaningless, it's a distinction without difference, really. And it gets to that question that you asked first, like, well, how do you even determine what religion an entity that can't go to church and can't pray, how you even determine what religion that is? And if you're like, well, it's the owner, right? Like Andrew, in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, it was Jack Phillips. It was the owner of the bakery. He wasn't even on the paperwork for the corporation by the time that case was decided, right? I mean, like, and this is part and parcel of the problem. Like, we set up corporations and businesses to offer people who want to go out and try important things like creating a new whatever it is, anything from a bakery to a store to a new data firm. I don't care. It doesn't matter, right? We want to give them that protection so that they don't have to risk their personal everything to do that as well. That's why we've set these up. And here we're just saying, yeah, that doesn't matter anymore. It's not a big deal. We're going to go ahead and let your religion flow right through all those protections. Yes, the business has to follow environmental laws. And yes, the business has to follow tax laws. And yes, the business has to follow all of these different things that really is important. But if you have a religious objection, you over here protected, then I guess you don't have to follow any of those rules or regulations. And really, people really need to think about where that is pushing us. I mean, because what we're talking about is a race to the bottom. And there are a few different areas where we're seeing this sort of pressure for businesses and entities to adopt religion so that they can avoid regulation. And there's even a huge set of cases that I allude to at the end of the book, where companies, essentially, especially religious employers, are trying to exempt themselves from all civil employment rules and regulations, basically saying courts could never hear an employment case against them if the employee has any even nominal religious duties. And of course, what they're doing is saying, well, my employee is religious. Now, historically, this has only been applied to like Christian and Catholic schools and churches, which is where it originated, which makes a little more sense when you're talking about like, well, churches should kind of have a religious freedom right to hire and fire clergy for almost whatever reason. Though you can dispute that too. But it's expanding and it's expanding and it's expanding, and like including at Catholic schools who are claiming that women are ministers, even though they can't hold that position in the Catholic Church. The church refuses to let them do that, but they're claiming that for legal purposes so that the women can't turn around and sue for things like age discrimination or sex discrimination or wage discrimination. And the schools are winning, the Catholic schools are winning in court. And we're seeing that, which is called the ministerial exception, we're seeing that expanded and advanced more and more and more. And I think it's just a matter of time before a corporation like Hobby Lobby tries to use that on its employees.
It's hitting me as we're having this conversation how important each individual case is, because all of these changes are incremental. And each one, if you just look at it in isolation, people can, propagandize around it or spin it or build a framing around it to make it seem like this case in and of itself isn't a big deal, or there's some sort of justification for passing this one. But once they aggregate, it becomes this monster. And that seems to be what's happening now. We're starting to see the impacts of that. I know you finished your book before Roe, but then like the court got packed with these people, and then Roe got overturned, and all of these things like all are starting to tumble down as a result of it. Like, do you think that people should start paying a little bit more attention to each of these individual cases as they come up? And
absolutely. I mean, this is partly like why I wrote this book, because so American Crusade tells you what happened in each of those cases and explains what the court got right and what the court got wrong. And any one of the cases in the book that's in these chapters could have been a standalone book. And there were times where I was like, I'm going to write just a book about this case. We could dive deep into one of the cases tonight, but I think that focus sends the wrong message, because it's not about one case. This is a full-on assault by a rich and powerful network. All of the cases in here are connected. It is all one assault. And so I tried to cover each one of them in depth and tie them together. So I really think American Crusade is like nothing people have read. It's not really a law book, right? It's like, and it's exposing an attempt to warp our law. It shows that the justices on the U.S. Supreme Court are eager and ready to take these cases. They want to hear these cases.
I had to pull over at one, sorry to interrupt you, but I had to pull over because I was listening to it while I was driving. When I heard about, I think it was Amy Coney Barrett, that she flat out lied about not knowing an organization, I can't remember the name of the organization right now. I'm sorry.
Alliance Defending Freedom.
Thank you. Knowing the horrible, like sort of bigoted pro-religious work that they were doing, when she was taking payments to be a speaker for them. So she just flat out outright lied. And that's just allowed to stand. It just it seems unfair.
She taught one of their fellowships. Yeah, she taught one of their fellowships, and she said, "Oh, I had no idea that they were anti-LGBTQ," which means you're either accepting teaching engagements from an organization that you know nothing about. I mean, like the most cursory research would tell you that ADF is an anti-LGBTQ group. Like it really doesn't take much to find that out. Or you're lying. I mean, those are the two options. And I don't think she's that dumb, actually. So, but I mean, it goes to the point, which is that the Supreme Court typically rejects like between 97 and 99% of the cases that come its way. But it decides almost every religious freedom case that comes its way, and it does so in favor of conservative Christians. Because again, the simple fact is that this court wants to decide these cases.
I know it's scary, And
Mhm.
sometimes I feel like I wish I had my Canadian flag on my desk so I could like hug it.
I mean, look, there's a good chance I'm gonna need a spot on your couch in the near future.
Anytime, Andrew. You know you're welcome here. But I mean, there is hope, one would presume. Like there are things that we
Mhm.
can do. This isn't a runaway train that we just have to watch like run into a wall. Like there must be something like that people can do to activate themselves.
I mean, there are things that people can do, and I do get into concrete solutions
I know you can't cover them all
in the
here.
end
Just
of
give
the
us a
book.
taste.
Yeah, I really do think like fighting for the separation of church and state in the U.S. is one of the most important things you can do, and that means supporting groups like the group I work for, Americans United for Separation of Church and State, AU.org. We need all the help we can get right now, and if you care about these issues, if you care about any progressive issue, really, keeping state and church separate is one of the most important things you can do. And I will say too, even without doing anything, I still have hope despite how terrifying shit is right now, and I recognize that it is, and that is because their wins swell our ranks. Right, they are creating a feedback loop that it's a suicidal feedback loop, really. So remember, the whole reason for this crusade in the first place is demographics, right? And white Christian nationalists are working to privilege the chosen few. So every legislative and legal victory that they notch alienates more people. It wakes more people up to the danger. It drives more people to defend the wall of separation between church and state, right? It drives more people to AU.org. So their power hungry aggression is actually growing our movement. And remember that, they're crusading because our side is working to meet those unmet promises in the American Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution. The self-evident truth that all are equal, that we the people means all the people. And so as we continue to march toward that progress, Christian nationalists are fighting ever harder against it. And again, they're not going to go gently. They're going to rage against the dying of their privilege. But in the end, I do believe we will win because they fight only for themselves. And where they are selfish, we are selfless. We're fighting for we the people, for all the people. Americans United fights for all. And our work allows Americans to come together to build a stronger democracy. And in fact, democracy and equality and freedom all depend on the separation of church and state. And the separation of church and state, in turn, enables those values. And that is why these well-funded crusaders are fighting so hard, both against that separation and against groups like Americans United. But that I also believe that's why, in the end, that we will triumph. And as I said, I get into more concrete solutions in the book, but I think the big caution that I would send to everybody out there is that none of those solutions are quick and easy. None of them, right? The Crusaders played a long game. They captured the highest court in the land, and that those justices are now drunk with power. We have a very long fight ahead of us to both win and then heal the damage that they're causing. And I think above all, two above alls. First, we have to shatter the myth that the judicial system / Supreme Court is going to fix this for us, because it is the problem. That there's no silver bullet for our side, right? We have to organize and message in ways that build power, and that is what American Crusade aims to do. It's also what Americans United for Separation of Church and State does every single day for the last 75 years, what we'll be doing for the next 75 years, it looks like. So it's a long game. And then, the final thing, which should be obvious, but it is probably not, is vote. For the love of the non-existent God, please go vote. It is literally the least you can do.
It really is.
It is the least you can do. If you want a chance to actually have the country that you want, you have to do more. But voting is literally the least you can do. Stacey Abrams says, it's not voting is not magic, it's medicine. All voting does is give us a chance to make some of the positive change that we want. It's just a chance. You still have a ton of work to do after that. And I think we tend to think of it as, a panacea, like, oh, it's my silver bullet. I voted. It's magic. Things will be better now. That's not the way it works. That's never the way it works. Nobody told you that. You're giving us a chance at best to make some real change by voting. So go out and vote.
Yeah. And I sometimes get frustrated when people seem so disillusioned with the concept of voting. I'm like, that is in some instances, that's basically all the power that you have. And if you're choosing not to exercise it, it just seems that you're conceding to defeat to these to these people who are just hoping that you feel that way.
Yeah.
Because they're showing up.
Not only are they showing up, they're doing everything they can to prevent you from showing up.
Yeah.
Like they
putting
are
literal roadblocks in place.
They are desperate to stop you from voting. And just think about why that might be. I mean, like they're doing everything in their power to try to prevent people from voting. And that alone should tell you how important it is. And if it doesn't, I'm pulling up this quote right now because I want to get it right. This is Paul Weyrich makes a big appearance a number of times in American Crusade, because the roots of the Crusade go back farther than the last decade. But Weyrich said this, and if you don't know who that is, he gave the moral majority its name. He founded that with Jerry Falwell. He is the one, along with Falwell, who chose abortion as the wedge issue for American politics. He founded ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council, this conservative group that puts out all kinds of model legislation for conservative red states to go past. He founded the Heritage Foundation and a lot more, right? And he actually admits this in the 1980s to several thousand preachers, almost all white and middle class, at this 2-day gathering where a bunch of Christian nationalists show up. People like Phyllis Schlafly, Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, Tim LaHaye, Ronald Reagan is there. It's called the Religious Roundtable. And this is what Weyrich says. He said, I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down. And our leverage in that is Christians. He's talking about Christians. He says, now many of our Christians have what I call goo-goo syndrome, good government. They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote. That's how he begins, right? Like this has been their goal for a long time. Don't let them win by convincing you that voting is pointless.
Yeah, well said. So I'm sure everybody now is super interested in where they can get the book, and you can get it down below. And also, so much has happened, and they can get a signed copy too. They can get a signed copy.
Yeah, and it's a really, I think, great thing to do, especially with the holidays coming up. If you've got a conservative in your life who needs to understand what religious freedom truly means, not their religious privilege version, this is a great book. And I partnered with one of the coolest bookstores in the country, A Room of One's Own bookstore, which is right here in Madison, Wisconsin, to give out inscribed and or signed copies. So I'll write a note in there if you like. This is feminist, queer-owned bookstore. They have a wide selection of stuff. They're actually, and their graphics have actually been making the internet rounds lately. They were featured in the New York Times. They're just an awesome bookstore. So if you want a signed copy, as Shannon said, down below, or bit.ly/signedac, like signed American Crusade, to get a signed copy. And when you're checking out, just leave a note. If you want me to write a note or you just want it signed, there's a little comments box. Just leave a comment and I'll make sure. I go in about every, 4, 5, 7 days and I sign a stack of 75 or 100 books. And they seriously, I'm a huge nerd, but I don't think I'm alone with a signed book is just one of the coolest gifts I think you can give somebody. So
yeah, no, it's the best. And
yeah.
I know people will have questions for you. I just want to let my audience know I will take super chat questions for Andrew at the end when I'm done talking, but I'm selfish, so I'm not done talking yet. So if you send a super chat, I will ask the question, but not now. You have to wait. So much has happened since you wrote the book that you've actually also had to include kind of like an addendum on your website. So
yeah.
Where can people get directed to that? Is that included in the links that you gave me?
Yeah, so I went back and forth with the publisher on this, and there's actually a link in the book,
Okay.
you'll see the web address inside the book. And really, I mean, an update for American Crusade, how the Supreme Court is weaponizing religious freedom, was always going to be necessary because the crusade to weaponize religious freedom is not some historical fight. It is an ongoing war that has been accelerating. And there is no amount of power or privilege that is going to satisfy the Crusaders. And the publisher and I went back and forth over when to finalize the text and how, how to best do that. And this is what we landed on. So, the text was finalized just before the Roe opinion leaked, even though I had a prediction in there, which did not make it, that said what the court was going to do. I convinced the publisher to let me squeeze in that update. So that's the last thing that I was able to include in the final text. But there's a whole update on my website. There's a link in the book itself, so you can go read it. And then they'll be seamlessly woven into future printings and audiobooks and ebooks even sooner. But yeah, and also I'll say this. The publisher hates it when I do it, but I'll say it anyway. I don't care if you buy the book. I just want you to read it. Go to your library, support your library. They're having a rough go. Say hi to your librarians. Yeah, and if they don't have a copy of it, you can request that your library get it, which is, in my mind, that's even better than buying it, because then a lot of people get to read it. So go do that.
Yeah, libraries do need a lot more support. Did you send one to Greg Locke yet? That was one of my funniest things that ever happened.
Yes.
Did you actually?
I did not, but
Somebody...
somebody ordered from a room of one's own, from my local bookstore. They ordered a copy for Greg Locke and asked me to write a note in it to him. So I did that. And then it was maybe 2 weeks after that book got mailed, he announced that he was doing his Halloween book burning.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so for people that don't know, this isn't Andrew's first book. Andrew wrote another book. Yeah. Put it up on screen. The Founding Myth. You were on here to talk about it when it came out. And I think it was shortly after he sent a copy to Greg Locke, and Greg Locke ripped it apart and burned it live. And then
he took a blowtorch to it. He didn't just burn it, he took a blowtorch to it.
Blowtorch.
Yeah.
And now he's having I was just talking to another YouTuber named Vice Rhino about this on his stream, that Greg is having his annual Halloween, burn the occult stuff, book burning. I'm betting yours is going on the pyre bio.
So if you're watching it and you see a red book fly through the air with a little white emblem on the front, let me know. Send me a screenshot.
Not that I want him to have an audience. I would love to see if we could figure out whether or not your book gets chucked on there.
I think it's a fairly safe bet at this point, given that he's doing it. But he faced a lot of backlash after burning the Founding Myth. I mean, it made international news when that happened. It was, we're laughing now, but which is,
it's because he's ridiculous.
Not much else you can do. He's ridiculous, but it was so bizarre. It was so bizarre because I put basically a decade of work into that book. I mean, the citations are extensive. I paid two of the most careful, detail-oriented attorneys I know a bounty for every error that they could find that I made in a citation. So if I was quoting a founding father and I wasn't being quite fair with my ellipses, or I left a word out of anything like that, I paid them a bounty. So that I had bounty hunters in there trying to find errors in this book. That's how much I cared about getting it right. And then this guy just comes along and just burns it with a blowtorch. And then he challenged me to a debate. And I go back and forth on this. And I was like, if you actually read the book, I will debate you. But you burned it. You don't have any arguments that I didn't refute in the very thing you just lit on fire. So I don't know. Maybe I should have debated him, but
no.
Yeah, no. I mean, okay, good. Thank you, Shannon.
No, God, no,
Yeah.
no. He's
Yeah.
not worth it. He is not worth your time. He's not worth your energy. Nope.
Those are fair points. Okay, that's where I was back then.
He is a lolcow. That is what he is good for. He is good for laughing at how ridiculous he is and somewhat pitying him. That's the extent of what that man is good for, as far
He
as
also
I'm
he does make an appearance in American Crusade too, because he was I have a chapter in here on the COVID cases, right? This claim that religious
Oh.
freedom is somehow a right to risk the lives and safety of everybody else, to put immense pressure on our healthcare system and frontline workers, none of which has ever been the case. And historically, we've said no, you can't do that.
Hmm.
So he makes an appearance in that chapter, as do several other people. I don't know if you remember, if you think back, there was a woman who went viral for a CNN interview. She was in her car, so she's driving across. This is the clip. She's driving across left to right in the CNN interview, standing there, and he puts the microphone up to her in the window, and he says, "Aren't you worried about COVID in there worshiping?" He's got his mask on. She doesn't. She said, "No, I'm covered in the blood of Jesus."
Oh yeah, no, yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, total viral moment. And I tell the story of that church, and why she said that, and that message actually has a through line all the way up straight to the Supreme Court, if you can believe it or not. So yeah,
I
crazy.
can believe it, because I think in a lot of instances, churches are used as indoctrination mills for people, like to get them either complacent or angry. And in a lot of instances, I think angry, because they make it seem as though they're being persecuted, and that way you have
Mm.
something to be afraid of. And if you have something to be afraid of, if you have a clear enemy, then you're in a defensive posture, and you're more likely to either defend the status quo or defend your own. And if
Yeah,
that's the case, you're going to support people that you feel are, protecting you from what you perceive as a threat. And a lot of churches, and Greg Locke is a good example of that, are not experts at, but adept at eliciting that type of emotional state from large groups of people, to get them in this fervor where they feel as though they need to take a protective posture, and they're less concerned with the nuances of how their position is going to impact the broader society, and more interested in making sure that them and the people they care about most are protected from the threat that's been put in their head. And a lot of churches,
the threat. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and it's really interesting, because that reminds me of the part in the book where one of the things that really struck me when I was writing this was that the crusaders and the believers in these cases, who they profess to be these devout people, that they're cowards, all of them. They lack the courage of their loudly confessed religious convictions. And it goes to what you're talking about, right? Like, American Christians' own religion tells them to expect tribulations,
Yeah.
right? It does not tell them to expect the government and the law bending to their every whim and fancy. And in fact, impending persecution is one of the few points on which all four gospels agree. And American Christians, they preach, they expect, and I think they even yearn for persecution in some corners, right? I mean, you can see it in the war on Christmas, the God's Not Dead movies, which actually have financial ties to the Crusaders.
Do they really?
Yep. They're tied right to Alliance Defending Freedom, the group that brought a lot of the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, for instance. Go watch the credits of the first one. They list all these cases that are threats to religious freedom, by which they mean Christian privilege and power and supremacy.
Well, that's the definition of propaganda then, because they're utilizing a media company to reinforce their narrative, to do the very thing that I just said.
Yep. And it works, because about half the country and 3/4 of Republicans think American Christians face persecution. And according to this one PRRI poll that I put in the book, it's like, I think it's white evangelicals are the only major religious group which say that, which a majority say that Christians face a lot of discrimination. And they also think that, then this is just nuts to me, that American Christians face more discrimination than Muslims. Right now, like, I would be the first to stand alongside them if the government were persecuting them, but that's just not happening. What is happening is that conservative Christians do not have the courage to bear the costs of their own beliefs. They're trying to shift those costs onto everybody else, right? Especially their bigotry, right? Like the cake shop owner, the bakery, right? He believes that marriage is between a man and one woman. But instead of him bearing the cost of that, he's trying to force it onto somebody else. Same thing with Kim Davis, right? They need to bear the costs for their beliefs. And because they cannot, they're cowards. And that need for political power to justify their cowardice is what is feeding that demographic decline and feeding that sort of suicidal feedback loop that I mentioned gives me hope earlier.
Yeah, but the Kim Davis one just seems so clear cut to me. So did the Masterpiece Cake one, to my mind. Like,
Yeah.
but she was just flat out not do it. She was not adhering to the law. She was just saying, "Yeah, I know what the law is. I know
Mhm.
that I have to give you this marriage license, but fuck you. I'm not going to because I don't feel like it. Even though it's literally my job to do this, I'm not going
Yeah.
to do my job."
Yeah, I mean, I used Kim Davis, as you know, and so in
Hmm.
American Crusade, I used because I thought I agree. I think there's a very clear case.
Mm.
What I try to do in the book is I really try to avoid legal and legal jargon and talk of legal tests and getting bogged down in a lot of the things that lawyers love to get bogged down in and love to hide behind. So I tried to cut through all that bullshit and really get back to the basics. And the thing that became very clear to me is that questions of religious freedom, questions when religion and the law collide, are actually like not that hard to answer. Actually, pretty basic and pretty simple questions. The problem is that crusaders have deliberately confused many Americans about where we draw those lines, and that a lot of conservative Christians conflate their privilege with freedom. But really, in the book, I boil all of the whole of religion and the law. And I've also, I mean, by the way, I've written legal textbooks about this, so I'm not like I know what I'm doing here. To 3 lines. Then I apply those lines in each of the cases, and I use the Kim Davis case as sort of like the template because it's such an obvious, clear example. And she had so many interviews on Fox News and all these other things that she said things that made it very clear and helped draw those lines and illustrate them.
Yeah, I just didn't. I also just didn't like her. I know that doesn't impact. I didn't much like her face, really, to be fair. All right, I will start taking questions for you soon. So if people have questions, please send a super chat. I will ask the questions, and if not, then please tag me so that I can see them because I'm not very good at following the chat.
Oh, give Shannon some super chats, y'all. Ooh,
Yeah, or
that was a rough
give
one
me
to get
interesting
out.
questions. I'm more concerned about making
Yeah,
sure that people get to ask you the questions that they want to ask you.
yeah,
Um,
at me,
Yes, or at Andrew. There you go. Are you paying
at me, bro.
attention?
No,
Are
I'm
you
not.
capable
No,
of what I am
no,
not
absolutely
capable of
not.
watching a chat.
Absolutely not.
Not well, anyway. If
No.
people tag me, it can usually draw my attention. But other than that, I can't follow along. I don't have the
Mm-mm.
capability. Um, when it comes to the I lost my train of thought because now I'm focused on how awful I am at following the chat. Because we were talking
It's a
about
lot. It's a lot to do.
it is, yes. Multitasking for me apparently is very, very difficult. But when it comes to the case in the book that impacted you the most when you
Mm.
were writing about it, is there a case that you found the hardest, like to get through? Not because it was a lot of like work, like and research to get through, but because it had an emotional impact on you, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a really good question. And I mean, part of I didn't realize this till the other day, and I was actually, I was doing a book talk in it was either Houston or Dallas that really part of a decent part of the book is biographical in a way.
Oh,
I'm telling this campaign that's happened over the last decade to help people understand what is happening from our politics to our culture to our law to our courts. I mean, the campaign has its roots farther back, but the last decade is like I lived all of these cases, right? This fight has been my whole career. Like I litigated some of them, I briefed others, I've been on the front lines defending our country from this assault. And so I'm able to tell the true stories behind the Supreme Court cases that make up this crusade, right? I'm able to draw back the curtain on the assault. And in every case, I dug much deeper than the facts that the Supreme Court recounts to you, because they're often wrong, especially these days. This is a court of alternative facts. I interviewed the people who were involved in these cases. I scoured the archives and the other records and the video and the audio and all that, so I could tell you the truth of what really happened. And one of the cases that really impacted me was the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, in part because I interviewed everybody involved in that. I interviewed the couple who was discriminated against, and I interviewed those two Colorado civil rights commissioners that the Supreme Court labeled anti-religious bigots, that basically scapegoated them, manufactured this hostility to decide the case in the bakery's favor. And one of them became interested in civil rights when she was in college in Washington, D.C., and was at a civil rights march and heard a young Martin Luther King Jr. speak about a dream that he had for the country. That was where she first got interested in this. Another is this really fascinating man who's an immigrant to this country. His family was, and he felt like he should give back, so he wanted to serve on the Civil Rights Commission. And the case, or the line that he said that the Supreme Court claimed was anti-religious bigotry, was him attempting to quote a state Supreme Court for the proposition that religion is not a license to harm other people. And it's actually, if you go read the opinion that he's trying to quote, it's actually a very beautiful, moving phrase that he's trying to quote. I mean, especially for a legal opinion. And the Supreme Court labeled these two people anti-religious bigots so that they could decide the case in favor of the bakery. Just absolutely, like, when you know what really happened there. And imagine being those two people and devoting, your lives or your careers to that. And that's where you come from. And then the U.S. Supreme Court says that you're a bigot. That case is, I think, certainly a watershed moment. Another one that I tell the story of, and I tell this one very early on in the book, is there's a case called Town of Greece versus Galloway, and this was the first time where I've said several times here that this is a court of alternative facts, that the Supreme Court makes things up, that they don't necessarily stick to reality. And that is an arc that I make clear. That's a theme in the book. I make this clear in each of these cases, and I've got the receipts. You can look them up in the citations. I've also paid one of those attorneys to do bounty hunting on this book. Anyway, so that 2014 case, I wrote one of the briefs at the Supreme Court. I was the lead author of it. I worked really hard. I followed the case from the beginning, almost the beginning. And this is a town in New York, Town of Greece, where the town council is having Christian prayers before every meeting. And every prayer is Christian. And now, that should obviously be unconstitutional. I mean, there's really no question. But there's a bad 1983 decision from the U.S. Supreme Court which said, well, we've been doing legislative prayer for a long time, so it's probably cool. Don't worry about it. But one of the things the court looked at was who was the audience for those prayers. The court found that it was important to know whether the prayers were for the legislators themselves, right? Are they just saying this is just for them so that they, set the tone for their business? Or is it using government power to impose religion on citizens? And in this case, you have, it's like a typical town council setup. So there's like a dais up top where all the city councilors sit in their big chairs, and they look down on the audience who are in like rows of chairs facing the dais. And then between the rows of chairs, there's a podium that faces the town councilors. And then people walk up to the podium and they say their piece to the members of the town council ahead of them. So that's where the prayer is delivered. The prayer giver walks up and delivers the prayer, except before the prayer is delivered, they turn the podium around to face the audience.
Oh.
Right? So it's a small thing, but when it comes to who is the audience for this prayer, like you don't get a clearer answer than that. Like it is, they are literally the caregivers. I'm turning my back. I'm turning my back on the council, and I'm directing it at the citizens, right? And these are people who are just there. They want to find out about their schools or their streets, or all these really important local issues that affect their lives. And instead, they have to sit through a Christian prayer. And the Supreme Court, the conservative majority in that case, just said, well, clearly these prayers are directed for the legislators themselves, and they just changed the fact, just changed reality. And now again, this may seem like a small thing to a lot of people, but like this is not what we're taught in law school. This is not what we're told our Supreme Court is in our public schools here in the United States, right? You may not like the decisions that it reaches, but it reaches them fairly, at least.
There shouldn't be obfuscating aspects of reality in order to come to a predetermined conclusion that they want to.
And that is exactly what happened. Yeah, and and it's like they just changed reality to reverse engineer that decision. And that really struck me. And one of my friend Aisha Khan was the lead attorney on that case for most of the time. And I actually interviewed her for this part of the book. And I was like, "Do you remember this?" And she was like, "Oh, yes, I remember." Like, and it was a moment of, it was so unjust, and that injustice was coming from the Supreme Court itself, right? Which is supposed to be the bastion of justice. And that was a turning point for me personally and professionally. To borrow from a book that we've all read, the scales kind of fell from my eyes, at least a little bit there. And that was the first domino, right? And you can see similar things happening throughout these cases, all the way to the point where you have in the most recent term, the Supreme Court adopting a deceitful narrative. Like, and those are not my words. A lower court judge warned the Supreme Court and said, "Hey, the other side is spinning a quote deceitful narrative here. Don't listen to them. They're lying." And the Supreme Court just adopts that deceitful narrative wholesale. So I mean, this is where we are now. It truly is a court of alternative facts.
It's so interesting to me now, looking at it after hearing you say it. It's that you would perceive this book, and it does make sense that this book is almost like a memoir of your activism to help and show people understand why this is something that you're so passionate about, and lay it out very clearly so that a layperson kind of understand what you go through essentially on a day-to-day basis in your job and in your activism. I hadn't perceived it that way, so I'm glad that you shared that.
I hadn't either until the other day. So, we're in good company. I mean, it really, it is, because, I have been on the front lines litigating each of these cases. And so I'm better positioned than just about anybody in the country to write about what really happened here.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. I will start asking the questions now. Okay. Sorry. I'll stop being greedy. The first one is from Paulogia, who says, beyond cash, what is the best thing an average non-US citizen could do to help support this American fight?
Yeah, I mean, start building out your guest rooms.
There's a bed over there.
No.
You can.
Yeah.
You'll have to get out when I'm streaming, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think hard. It's obviously a little harder for non-American citizens, and I imagine you feel a sense of helplessness watching from beyond our borders what is currently happening.
And fear that somebody here may adopt similar coercive, propagandistic, and iterative litigation strategies to implement something like that here, and that it may take impact because your culture impacts our culture a great deal.
Yeah, I mean, it's an Overton window too. I mean, it's not, there are the concept of the law is, it's not completely divorced country to country. There are a lot of interconnections. I mean, I think you obviously can't vote too, which is one of the things that I like to talk about. But I think observing I think, well, I guess I was going to say, I think being an outside observer can have a lot of value, but to a lot of Americans, that's just like, we don't care what you think, which is sad. But I do think like pointing out, hey, this is doesn't have to be this way. One of the things that I think we suffer from, that we definitely suffer from here, is this disease of American exceptionalism. And the idea that our Constitution is just the best Constitution there ever has been, could be, or will be. There's some really cool and remarkable things about our Constitution, especially the secular aspects of it. Right, the first to cite power in the people, right? We the people. Kind of left out a lot of people when it did that, though, so could be better. The divorcing religion and government, so for instance, banning religious tests for public office in Article 6, first constitution to do that. That's pretty impressive. That's pretty cool. And then went further with the First Amendment, and really separated church and state in a way that no other government in human history had done, and did that intentionally. That's pretty remarkable. But a lot of the other stuff is pretty bad. There's a lot of really bad stuff in there. Then a lot of it's the result of compromises over which really boiled down to a lot of it to slavery. I mean, the Electoral College, you can trace back to that. And is the bane of our existence these days. One of the banes of our existence. Elie Mystal, who is another legal writer and thinker who I admire greatly, wrote a book called Allow Me to Retort. And he points out, other constitutions that were steeped and based in racism, they didn't just tack on 3 or 4 sentences
be like that
to try to fix it. Yeah, which is what we did, right? With the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. We fought a civil war, and they're like, oh, we can fix this with these 3 amendments.
I'll just put a Post-it note on it. I'll read this too.
Seriously.
Yeah.
And then he uses as an example South Africa, which after the apartheid government fell, it was overturned, threw out that apartheid constitution and started from scratch, and has a pretty remarkable constitution as far as constitutions go these days. Also had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to sort of have a national moment of healing there. So I think providing that example and providing that soft landing for when shit goes down is certainly something you can do. Cash, of course, helps. There are rules. I'm not going to give out legal advice on this, so look up those rules before you do any donating. But you can certainly join C3s that are out there fighting for a stronger democracy and fighting for the separation of church and state. Those are definitely things you can do. And then the big solution that I haven't touched on yet, which I'm sure we'll get asked about later, is we really need to expand our Supreme Court. And that needs to be a talking point.
You peeking? You're peeking. Well, I guess we'll ask the next question.
I'm not. This is just right there. It's pretty clear in the book.
All right, so. We'll skip over the next question and come back to it, because the question this feeds into it, because it Spoken J, I'm probably mispronounced that. I'm so sorry if I did. Said love and hate the book. So clearly they've read it.
I understand.
What has to happen to expand the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, to expand the Supreme Court, you have to overcome the filibuster. I mean, so let me back up a second. I got ahead of myself. The number of justices on the U.S. Supreme Court is set by Congress. That's very clear. In fact, it's in the Constitution. Congress gets to decide how many justices are on the Supreme Court. All you have to do to change that is pass a law. But that's happened quite a few times in our nation's history. I think it's happened 7 times by statute, which is, something like every 35 years in our history on average. Mitch McConnell did it just a little while ago, right? He actually changed the number, not by statute, but he changed the number to 8 for about 14 months when it suited him politically. And then he put it back up to 9 when it suited him politically, right? So changing the number of the Supreme Court is actually a pretty normal, reasonable thing to do, and is one of the things Congress is supposed to do. I mean, that means, and I need to be clear, we're not changing the number of justices on the Supreme Court because that the court's overworked or because there are 13 circuits, so we need 13 justices. We're changing them, and we should want to change it because the Supreme Court has been packed, because it has been captured by these crusaders who are reverse engineering these decisions, right? Like, to suggest that we're doing this otherwise is, to me, crazy. So, I talk a lot in the book, or a little actually, I guess, in the book, about a guy named Leonard Leo. Leonard Leo ran the Federalist Society. He is universally recognized as the man who orchestrated this. It's a hostile takeover of the Supreme Court. And a former employee described Leonard Leo's mission like this. He said, quote, "He figured out 20 years ago that conservatives had lost the culture war. Abortion, gay rights, contraception. Conservatives didn't have a chance if public opinion prevailed. So they needed to stack the courts." And they did, right? And so notice the anti-democratic admission in that, and the goal inherent in that quote, right? If they didn't stack the court, the majority would rule. If they didn't pack the court, democracy would work the way it was supposed to. They're trying to find a way around democracy. They're trying to find a way to ensure minority rule. And Leo spent $540 million packing the court from 2014 to 2020. This summer, we actually got news that his new group raised $1.6 billion in a single donation. That's billion with a B, so that's $1 billion more than they spent capturing the court. So yes, send those dollars this way for our fight. So I mean,
donation?
How
can
donation.
that much money be allowed to go into politics?
It's going into technically a it's very convoluted, but yes, I mean it's not directly into politics is the short version. Not indirectly into a partisan campaign is the short version. It's crazy. And I mean, you learn. So by the way, you learn all about this in the update to American Crusade, which again is available online for free to anybody who buys the book. And Leo's job at the Federalist Society, trying to get to pack the courts, was this. It was described like this. He was the, quote, monitor of the nominees' ideological purity. Right, the monitor of the nominees, that's judicial nominees, ideological purity. And so we know he is responsible for the confirmation of Chief Justice John Roberts, Justice Sam Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. I mean, that's 5. That's a majority on our Supreme Court. Thomas is an old friend of his. All 6 of those justices were members of the Federalist Society. There's actually a video of Thomas and Leo joking on stage about how Leo is the 3rd most powerful man in the country. So that's 6 votes on the Supreme Court. And Leo personally chose 5 of them for their ideology, right? A crusader ideology. And that demands correction, right? I mean, that is corruption that demands correction. So when we talk about expanding the court, we are talking about expanding the court to undo a court that has already been packed to serve special interests. So that's what we need to be. That's the message that we need to be hammering and we need to be hitting, I think. So that's why I would suggest that we expand the court. 4 justices is fine. 8, I'm good with. 10. Put 20 more justices on there. I don't care. The higher the number, the less power each of them has. I'm good with that. 9 is not special. There's nothing special about that. So all it takes, this is me being a lawyer. The answer to that question is we just need Congress to pass a law.
10 minutes later, Congress needs to pass a law. So support candidates who would be willing to support.
Get out and vote. Law. There's 0 chance of it happening without a blue House and a blue Senate. 0 chance.
And I wish more people would actually physically pick up a phone or type an email and actually speak to their representatives. I don't think people realize that that's something that they can avail of.
And it's actually very important to do.
Put pressure
there are
on
people
them.
Yeah, there are people in office who keep count of calls they get for and against things. Um, and also, I mean, right now, like when I said voting is literally the least you can do, I did mean that. I mean, like if you want to actually have you can post all the political memes and opinions you want and polls and your thoughts and all that on social media, and it does not matter at all. You'd be far better served spending 15 minutes calling, phone banking for a progressive candidate in a district that has a chance at winning, if you can get out the vote. Like, and if you like have no idea how to do that, and I've convinced you that voting is literally the least you can do, and you want to do more, go to votesaveamerica.org and volunteer. Sign up to volunteer. Do it now.
Cool. All right. We have one more question, and it is from Zach. Andrew, what led you to your seeming new job from FFRF?
Oh, good question, Zach. I mean, a number of things. Yeah.
You don't have to answer questions you're not comfortable with.
I mean, it's a good question, and I've been asked variations of it a lot, and I get why people are curious. I will say this: like, I truly loved the people who I worked alongside at FFRF. I was the lawyers there, and the people who worked on my team were some of the most brilliant, amazing people I've ever had the joy of working alongside. I was at FFRF for more than a decade, and truly believed in the fight, in the membership there, and the people I worked alongside. I am also just absolutely thrilled and over the moon to be working with Americans United for Separation of Church and State, AU.org. I will say this. We are not going to defeat Christian nationalism in America without building a big tent. It is not going to happen. Shared values in this fight matter far more than shared beliefs. There's just an absolute crucial aspect of this fight. We've got to build a ton of bridges and alliances if we are going to push Christian nationalism back to the fringe whence it came.
Yeah, there's actually lots of Christians who would, and likely do, ally in this cause. Like they don't think that the direction that this is heading is a positive one, and they want to join the ranks. So I sometimes lament if organizations or individuals who have platforms do what they can seemingly to isolate anybody who is a Christian from maybe, not joining the ranks of the people who want to do, like you said, have values in common and see this as a shared issue.
Yeah. My dream would be to live in a country where the separation of church and state is valued by everyone, and where we all understand, right, that true religious freedom can only exist with a secular government. When we get there's no freedom of religion without a government that's free from religion, right? I want to live in a country where the nonprofits that I work for are unnecessary. Like that's what I want. I want a country where I can get together with Christians and have a deep, fascinating conversation about God and the nature of the universe and why we're all here, and disagree about all of those things. Like that sounds lovely to me. Over like beer and guacamole, great. But right now, at this moment, we are fighting a movement that would, if given the power or if it takes the power, make any kind of conversation like that impossible. That is going to privilege conservative white Christians above everybody else, that is going to create America where there are two classes of people, the privileged white conservative Christians and everyone else. Our country's on fire. Our democracy isn't slipping away, it's being stolen. And those of us who share values like equality and justice and truth and fairness must come together to stop this, to fight Christian nationalism. So that's a roundabout way of me not answering your question.
Well, we got to talk about something else that is important, though.
It was still very important.
Some of these things need to cross ideological boundaries when it comes to belief systems, and I can get that it's sometimes hard if you
Mm-hmm.
feel as though the people who are constantly waving a flag that says Christianity, if those people are the ones who you're perceiving as dangerous and oppressors because they're loudly proclaiming that they are, and the next person you see that's carrying the same flag you might think belongs to their ranks, even if they don't necessarily align with them. So
Yeah.
sometimes it can be
I
difficult.
mean, you're right, but one of the best things I was able to do in my time at the Freedom from Religion Foundation was one of the last things I did, which was I conceived of this idea and spearheaded this report
Mm-hmm.
on the role that Christian nationalism played in the January 6th insurrection. Right, that this was my project beginning to end. I partnered with Baptist Joint Committee, which is a religious organization with Amanda Tyler over there, to put together this report, to bring together these experts on Christian nationalism like Anthea Butler, Jamar Tisby, Andrew Whitehead, Sam Perry, right? All of those folks are Christians. Catherine Stewart joined too. And we wrote this report that made waves in Congress, that the January 6th committee took notice of. They asked me to submit testimony to their committee that touched on what the sections of the report that I wrote. And that would not have been possible, or it would not have been taken seriously. It certainly would not have made the impact that it did. I mean, that impact still being felt and seen today, if it had been just one organization working on it. So it's one of the things that I'm most proud of in my time at FFRF.
Awesome. Well, we've come to an end of questions, and I think an organic end to this conversation. If anybody would like to get Andrew's book, a signed copy especially, or his previous book, the links are down below in the description. Go and get them. And
Please go read them.
Go read them. Yeah, don't just get them. They're not just shelf decorations. Read them, everyone. There'll be a quiz. There will be a quiz later.
There will be. Yes, indeed.
So thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to come have a conversation with me, but I think it's an important topic, and I hope that this helps more people get introduced to your book and take it seriously and have a different perspective on it. So thank you for spending the time with me.
Thank you for having me on, Shannon. It was such a pleasure.
Anytime, my friend. You know you're always welcome here, and I've got a bed ready for you for when you finally are a refugee. Do you have any parting words for our audience before we say a final goodbye?
Oh my goodness. It was a lot of fun to be here with you. And I do know things seem dark right now, but I do want to reiterate what I said earlier, that I do have hope. I genuinely do. I do think we are going to win this fight in the end, because everything they are trying to do, everything they want, is alienating people and driving them away from white Christian nationalism and into our ranks. I do think we will win, but it's not going to be without a fight.
Oh, well, that is a lovely parting note. Thank you again for being here with me today. And as always, everybody, help elevate the discourse. Bye.